Reliable energy is foundation for any advanced economy and critical for families and businesses to thrive. And when electricity is unreliable, the potential consequences are nothing short of catastrophic, including loss of human life. We know that our grid is most strained during the hottest and coldest periods of the year. That's why before each summer and winter, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC as we know it, issues a reliability assessment. And the latest assessments have been frightening. The chart behind me shows NERC's short-term assessment for this summer and a long-term assessment for the next 5 years. The orange is, as you see behind you here, the orange shows that we have a challenge and the reliability is not certain. The red is serious, and for the next 5 years, just about the whole country is in a situation where we're not as reliable as we could and should be. Both assessments show 2/3 of the country facing reliability challenges as soon as this summer and lasting well into the future. And I think all of us will agree this is unacceptable, but it's not surprising. I've expressed strong concerns for years that that is what an unmanaged energy transition would look like. FERC and NERC have made recent efforts to develop new cold weather reliability standards to put us on firmer footing. These were much needed steps, but more action is needed. And while increasingly extreme weather events are part of the reliability challenge, we're also hearing growing concerns from grid operators across the country about losing our dispatchable generation resources before we're able to replace them. I want to take a moment now to remind everyone that all 4 FERC commissioners, set right where you're sitting, testified just last month that the grid will not be ready to operate without coal power in the near future, and if we want to maintain a reliable system, it must be there. Yet, through regulation after regulation, the administration seems hell-bent on accelerating the premature retirements of our fossil plants. That is coupled with gaps in our power market designs that fail to require the right reliability attributes for renewables being added to the grid. And excessively long permitting processes are keeping us from bringing any new generation resources online in a timely fashion, whether it be fossil, renewables, nuclear, you name it, all of the above, we have a challenge. It seems the question is not if we'll face another electric reliability crisis, but when. And the American people need us to do better than what we have. Let me address federal regulations first. There is no doubt that our electric grid is undergoing a transition both in generation sources and in the types of demand the grid is called on to serve. But the speed of this transition must be balanced against reliability and affordability of electricity. We know much larger portions of our grid would have experienced blackouts during winter storms Elliott and Uri if our coal fleet was retired prematurely. During these storms, coal power was one of the most reliable energy sources. But the EPA won't let electric reliability inconvenience their anti-fossil agenda. Within 6 months of the winter storm Elliott, EPA's response was to roll out 4 new regulations poised to shut down 50,000 megawatts or more of coal powered over the next decade, whether the grid is ready for it or not. The only thing I would say to all of you, if you're concerned about that and what direction we're going and you don't want to make the mistake, talk to the Germans. Talk to Germany and find out what they did and how it worked for them. EPA is not hiding their strategy. It's death by 1,000 unreasonable cuts for fossil. For example, if you want to operate a fossil plant, the new proposed rules say that you're going to need CCUS. But the fact is the administration hasn't approved a single Class 6 well permit that would allow capture CO2 to be securely stored. Let me be clear. Requirement to use CCUS with a refusal to issue CCUS permits is a shutdown requirement. Congress has charged NERC with protecting the reliability of the electric system. But I'm not sure that people are aware that agencies like EPA are not required to and usually don't consult NERC about the reliability impacts of proposed new regulations on power plants. This makes absolutely no sense at all. I know my colleague, Senator Brasso, has legislation to change that, and I'm also working on legislation to address this glaring omission. Having our environmental regulator work with our reliability regulator on power plant rules is just common sense if we don't want a catastrophe. This is something I would think every member of our committee could support. We also know that the pressure on the dispatchable power plants are not just a product of federal regulations. It's also driven by state policies and gaps in the way our electricity markets value reliability. At its core, this is a simple math problem. We're seeing more dispatchable resources shut down faster than new dispatchable resources are being added. We've seen over 90 gigawatts of coal power retire in the last decade. And we could see twice as much dispatchable capacity retire over the next decade on the path that we're heading right now. And by dispatchable, I mean controllable and flexible to meet supply and demand. Right now, that includes coal, gas, nuclear, and hydropower. And in the future, it'll include renewables paired with storage too, which we're working on. But the markets aren't valuing dispatchable resources of any type properly to reflect the problem that we have. And the buck stops at our grid operators like PJM, MISO, and certain utilities who are required by law to ensure NERC reliability standards are met. Our markets have allowed renewables to receive the same payments as dispatchable resources without providing the same benefits of the grid. I want to acknowledge that PJM and other markets have recently taken initial steps to begin appropriately compensating the reliability benefits of different types of power plants, but much more is needed. This can't be more clearly demonstrated than in PJM's recent assessment that 40 gigawatts of existing generation are at risk of retirement by 2030. Yet, only about 30 gigawatts of equivalent capacity are projected to be added. And at the same time, demand on PJM expected to grow by 15 gigawatts in that window, resulting in declining reserve margins for the first time in recent history. So I'm interested to hear our witnesses' perspectives on market changes that would ensure these critical dispatchable resources are not retiring prematurely without adequate, reliable replacements. I also believe FERC needs clear authority to keep these reliability critical generators from prematurely retiring and to issue regulatory exemptions as necessary so that ratepayers aren't being penalized just to keep the lights on. Because the impact of these collective EPA regulations is also a fairness issue. Take a coal plant that is an example which has already invested tens if not hundreds of millions of dollars on environmental upgrades like scrubbers, baghouses, and low NOx boilers, and now could be required to spend tens of hundreds of millions more or else shut down. The investments already made have useful lives of decades, and ratepayers are going to be on the hook paying for them for decades, whether the plant is shut down or not. It's ridiculous. Is this administration, which claims to be focused on equity, blind to the fact that the policies that they're pushing are going to harm low-income ratepayers in states like mine, West Virginia, and Wyoming, and all of other rural states, saddling them with unaffordable power while stripping them of reliable energy? For generators that must remain online for reliability, we must not penalize the ratepayers by requiring hundreds of millions of dollars in additional environmental controls that will not ever be recouped in the remaining life of the plant. I also want to speak briefly about electric transmission. The fact of the matter is that large, multi-state transmission lines are needed for reliability, but they are rarely getting built. And the wait to connect new generation to the transmission grid is growing at the same time that we need these resources more than ever. Wait times went from 2 years in 2000s to an average of 5 years by 2022. We have over 2 terawatts, that's 2 million megawatts, waiting in the queue. These delays are having real impacts on getting dispatchable generation into the grid. In Doddridge County in West Virginia, a little county in my state, a new 1,800 megawatt natural gas plant with carbon capture is stuck waiting 68 months to get connected to the PJM transmission system. I'm very glad to see important NEPA reforms included in the debt ceiling deal that myself and many of our members in this committee have advocated for, which will help projects like this complete federal NEPA reviews in 1 to 2 years. But it takes 5 years to hook into the grid. That could become the bottleneck instead of NEPA. So I think more needs to be done to improve federal permitting of all types of energy infrastructure, including transmission. I welcome our witnesses' perspectives on how permitting reform for all types of energy can benefit electric reliability, whether it's transmission lines to move electrons between states and regions, pipelines to better supply our gas generators, or anything else it takes to get reliable energy in our country. Your input will help inform our committee's future work on permitting. Our committee has responsibility for ensuring our federal power laws and energy agencies are promoting reliable electricity for the nation. I'm confident we can develop bipartisan proposals to better equip NERC and FERC and the electric industry with tools to address the reliability threats the grid is facing. All 4 of our witnesses have provided suggestions for Congress to act in the written testimony, including increasing the involvement of our reliability experts in developing environmental regulations, better management of the pace of retirements, permitting reforms, and several other ideas worth considering. So I look forward to hearing recommendations from each of you about the most impactful steps that we could take as a committee. With that, I turn to Senator Brasso for his opening remarks.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. And first, I do look forward to continuing to work with you on permitting reform. As you said, there's more we can do, there's more we should do, there's more we need to do, and that's why I've joined with every Republican on this committee in introducing the SPUR Act. It stands for Spur Permitting of Underdeveloped Resources Act. And America needs to generate more, not less energy. We need more homegrown energy, natural gas, coal, uranium, you name it, we need it all. We need to have a reliable electric grid. That means generating more, not less, reliable and available and affordable power. A transmission line without reliable and available electricity is like a stream bed without water flowing through it. So as we continue to work on permitting reform, Mr. Chairman, we need to focus on producing more reliable American energy and not just on how to transport it. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm so grateful that you called today's hearing. Reliable, resilient, affordable electric service is indispensable to our nation. When the electric grid fails, it puts our other essential services at risk or makes them unavailable. The consequences are catastrophic. There's no disputing the fact that electricity needs to be produced at the instant people call for it. Men and women who enable our electric grids to work must hold production and demand in balance all the time. They must do this year in, year out, no matter what time of day, no matter what the weather happens to be. No excuse, no finger pointing is acceptable when an electric system fails. We know the sad reality. Electric service in this country is at an increasing risk of unacceptable risk of failure. One can't predict blackouts, yet given current trends, one can reasonably project that we will have more what regulators are calling unplanned outages. Writing's on the wall. Summer 2020, California's energy policies left the state's electric grid operators with no other choice but to impose rolling blackouts on its residents. February 2021, cold weather, insufficient baseload power resulted in major blackout in Texas. December 2022, cold weather and a failure to secure sufficient natural gas nearly led to a blackout in the entire mid-Atlantic. After the 2021 blackout, 2 of the 4 witnesses before us today sat here at the same witness table and warned us of similar risks to the grid. They will warn us of that again today. Just last month, members of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission warned us of the same threats. Commissioner Danley said there is, quote, an impending but avoidable reliability crisis. Commissioner Christie said there is a looming reliability crisis. Neither commissioner issued these warnings lightly. Commissioner Danley said, I fervently hope to be proven wrong. Commissioner Christie said, I do not use the term crisis for melodrama, but because it is an accurate description of what we're facing. Commissioner Christie put it succinctly when he said, the problem generally is not the addition of intermittent resources, primarily wind and solar, but the far too rapid subtraction of dispatchable resources, especially coal and gas. I think we're going to hear similar testimony from our witnesses today. Electric grid operators must have access to a diverse set of resources. That includes coal, natural gas, nuclear and hydropower, along with wind and solar. Electric transmission can help with a big challenge, weather-related or otherwise, whatever comes along. Transmission helps one region lean on another. Still, we must have electrons to put on the transmission lines. We must address the problem of premature retirements of plants that generate power at all times. Wind and solar energy now supply about 15% of the nation's power. They don't replace always-on power. When the wind doesn't shine, when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, we get no power. We must acknowledge the indispensable value of power plants that generate electricity whenever they are called upon. Last fall, President Biden said, we're going to be shutting coal plants down all across America. Just last month, the EPA proposed new regulations to shut down both coal and natural gas plants. President Biden is doubling down on reckless policies. They are a danger to our electric grid. We need to restore balance. President Biden's administration rarely lets a day go by without talking about what they mistakenly and inaccurately call the climate crisis. It's time they acknowledge their policies are creating a reliability crisis. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Grasso. And before we go to the witnesses, I'm going to turn to Senator Wyden because he has another pressing committee he has to go to. Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I want to commend you for holding a very important hearing and make just a couple of points real quickly and then have a question that I'm going to pose for the record to Mr. Tudor, who's been doing great work for the rural electrics. In early summer of 2021, after designing it and writing it, particularly with the input of the chairman, the Senate Finance Committee moved close to $300 billion worth of clean energy tax credits, the biggest investment in energy security and climate in our country's history. At the time, and we have a number of colleagues from the committee, the senator from Nevada, Senator Cortez Masto, we said we had two additional priorities, Mr. Chairman, and we started working on that. One of them you just mentioned in your testimony, and that is expanding transmission. We know that that is vitally important. And second, we have to harden the power grid. And Mr. Tudor, your folks were very helpful to us in the Disaster Safe Power Grid Act, which we got into the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And my question, just so you'll have it for the record, is I'd like you in the course of the morning to outline the additional steps that your members in rural communities need to further harden the power grid. We know we're going to have another tough fire season. I'm looking down the row here, and my colleagues are going to be asking you about that too. This is not something that is an abstract kind of question. This is existential for Western communities. So thank you for your cooperation. Mr. Chairman, you have been helping us from the get-go, and I remember those first days when you invited me to West Virginia, and we'll continue that cooperation. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. And again, I want to say thank you to all of our witnesses today for being here. We appreciate it very much. I want to introduce all of you. It's Mr. Jim Roberts, President and CEO of North American Electric Reliability Corporation. Mr. Manu Ashtana, is that close? Hot dog. President and CEO of PJM. We have Dr. Melissa Lott, Senior Research Scholar and Director of Research, Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy. And we have Mr. David Tudor, CEO and General Manager of Associated Electric Cooperative. Mr. Rob, we're going to start with you.
Great. Well, good morning, Chairman Manchin and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss our views on reliability and resilience of the electric grid. Ranking Member Barrasso as well. First of all, we believe that the electric power system is absolutely at an inflection point right now. The electric transmission grid is highly reliable and resilient, yet the risk profile to customers is steadily increasing. Our assessments demonstrate that the electric grid is operating ever closer to the edge, where more frequent and more serious disruptions are increasingly likely. We also believe that the energy transformation can be navigated in a reliable way. That is, of course, with the proviso that the pace of grid transformation is recalibrated with the reliability needs of the system. Let me begin by reviewing four major factors contributing to this deteriorating risk profile. First, the foundation upon which the grid operates is out of balance. The system must constantly balance affordability, reliability, and environmental sustainability, and we are not making the required investments for reliability as the system transforms. NERC reliability assessments demonstrate this lack of balance. Our summer and long-term assessments, as you showed earlier today, show that the risk of energy shortfalls is increasing and spreading to more areas of the country. This is particularly true during periods of extreme weather, as we have experienced over the past 5 years, with broad area heat events impacting the West and widespread severe cold events impacting the eastern and southeastern portion of the U.S. This trend is being driven by disorderly retirements of conventional generating capacity, often coal, nuclear, and older natural gas, performance issues with replacement resources, energy uncertainty during increasingly frequent wide area, long duration extreme weather events, and increased demand due to electrification policies, coupled with the slow development of energy infrastructure. Second, while the risk is increasing, the underlying performance of the electric grid that NERC oversees continues to improve, suggesting the success of the ERO model. In the bulk electric system that is under our direct jurisdiction, we see sustained improvements in human and equipment performance, leading to substantially reduced unplanned transmission outages. We've not had a major cascading failure of the system in over 13 years. Third, a number of interrelated factors behind high-profile outages such as Winter Storms Uri and Elliott, the summer 2020 outage in California, and a series of near misses are driving risk. These factors include the performance of inverter-based resources, performance issues with generation under extreme weather conditions, fuel supply disruption, especially natural gas during winter conditions, and a general decline in the reliable generating capacity, which is removing the highly valuable slack in the system. And fourth, I have to acknowledge that new technologies do offset some of these risks. Some of these emerging technologies that are being deployed have the potential in the long run to make a substantial difference, especially batteries. So let me turn to solution space, beginning with NERC's actions. We are highly focused on the performance of inverter-based technologies to ensure that they can contribute to reliability and not compromise it during periods of stress, as we have experienced in multiple events. We are working to establish planning requirements that focus on energy sufficiency to meet 24/7 customer demands. Our efforts are focused both on near-term operations as well as long-term planning horizons. We are working to incorporate more extreme weather conditions and scenarios into our planning and operating requirements. To that end, we have also established FERC-approved weatherization requirements for generating plants. We are also focused on understanding and establishing performance requirements for the increasing number of generating facilities, often inverter-based, that are connecting at voltages below the level of the bulk electric system. It's important to note here that our goal is not to expand our jurisdiction, but simply to ensure that these resources support reliability. And I'll conclude here with a call for action in 5 areas outside of our direct jurisdiction. First, we absolutely need to rethink the policy and oversight of the intersection of the natural gas industry with the electric sector. Natural gas is the largest power generation fuel in the United States, and power generation is now the largest end-use consumer of natural gas. It's time that we acknowledge that and address the reliability and resilience of this key interface. Second, we need to ensure that the appropriate investments in reliability and fuel security are rewarded, particularly in areas of the country that rely on power markets and market signals to drive investments and operating decisions. Next, reliability needs to be prioritized in policy decisions made by other executive branch departments that affect the pace of retirements. And because the low-carbon future requires significant investment in electric transmission and other energy infrastructure, we must break the back of the infrastructure siding challenge. And then finally, we need to keep our foot on the gas, accelerating the deployment and development of new technologies such as grid-forming inverters, energy storage, new nuclear technologies, and hydrogen. As we continue to electrify the economy, reliability is going to only become increasingly important. And as I like to tell my team, nearly 400 million citizens across North America depend on a reliable supply of electricity to support their way of life. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ashana.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this hearing. I am the CEO of PJM Interconnection. PJM was formed in 1927 and has grown to become the largest grid operator in the U.S. We direct the operation of the grid in all or parts of 13 states and D.C., serving 65 million customers. PJM doesn't have a profit motive. We are revenue neutral and independent of our members. Our primary purpose is maintaining the reliability of the bulk power system, and this is a responsibility we take very seriously. Like most of the country, our grid is in transition. And to give you a sense of scale, our peak load is about 150 gigawatts. Our interconnection queue has over 250 gigawatts of generation waiting to be processed to see if they want to interconnect and if they can interconnect reliably. 97% of this generation is solar, wind, batteries, or some hybrid of these resources. And so looking at our queue, it's very clear the transition is happening. And PJM is committed to facilitating it as reliably and cost-effectively as possible using the power of competitive power markets. And we've taken significant steps already towards this goal, including major interconnection reform, which is expected to result in the processing of over 200 gigawatts of new generation over the next few years. We've also launched an initiative to bring all of our work ensuring a reliable transition under a single umbrella. PJM is currently in a sound position. If you look at the chart that you showed, Senator Manchin, we today have sufficient generation to meet the anticipated needs of our system. And our markets and our planning and our operations add between $3 and $4 billion of value of savings a year to the customers in our footprint. However, as we look further out, we are concerned by 4 trends, and they're very similar to the trends that Jim laid out. But the 4 trends are, number one, the dispatchable generation we rely upon today to balance the grid is retiring, and it's retiring at a rapid rate and it's retiring mostly driven by policy considerations. Second, electrification and large-scale data center construction is poised to create significant load growth in our footprint. Third, our new generation queue is largely intermittent, and so we need multiple megawatts of the new generation to replace 1 megawatt of the retiring generation. And finally, the new generation is coming online slower than anticipated. And there are a lot of reasons for this, and we can talk about it. But if these trends continue, we see increasing resource adequacy risk in the future. And these issues aren't just a concern for us. We've seen the NERC chart that shows 2/3 of the country is already at risk of increased resource adequacy as soon as this summer. So we believe it is critical to take steps now to de-risk the transition. The math of it is straightforward, even if the execution is not. We need to accelerate the pace of new entry through actions such as permitting reform, further interconnection reform, and policies that reduce backlog in the supply chain. And while most new entry is likely to be renewable plus batteries, given the composition of our queue, we will also need new natural gas resources. And so whatever we do, we need to be able to enable those and the infrastructure that supports them. Additionally, we will need to slow down the retirement or restriction of existing generation until replacement capacity is deployed and operational at scale and demonstrated to be doing so. And frankly, we see this as the single largest risk in the energy transition. It's not about the entry of the new intermittent resources. It is about the premature exit of the resources that we need to balance the grid. Pardon me. Finally, we strongly encourage an approach to policymaking that expressly evaluates reliability impacts in the development phase of policy, not after the fact. And we stand ready to help with this evaluation and to play our part to ensure a reliable transition. And like Jim, we're optimistic that it is possible, but also we feel it will take a different approach to policymaking that prioritizes reliability in it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present my testimony today and for your attention to these important issues. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. Dr. Lott, please.
Good morning, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. So my name is Melissa Lott, and I'm the Director of Research and a Senior Research Scholar at Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy, which is a part of the School of International and Public Affairs. I'm also an adjunct professor at Columbia University's Climate School, and I've worked as an energy systems engineer for nearly 20 years across the United States, as well as Europe and Asia. Today, in the different positions that I hold, I also serve in roles at the United Nations Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition, which is an independent advisory council to the UN Secretary General, and I serve as a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on the future economics of equitable transition. My testimony today will cover three broad things. One, the impacts of reliability issues on health and the economy in the United States. The second is the broad determinants of grid reliability, including the effects from different fuel sources and technologies in the context of the evolving supply mix. We'll also discuss actions the federal government could take to support a reliable and affordable electricity system in the face of a changing climate, evolving demand for electricity, and also the integration of these new supply technologies. Electricity is a vital input to the U.S. economy. It supplies around 22% of total final energy consumption in the numbers we look at from 2020. And while net generation has remained essentially flat since 2005, the mix of technologies providing that electricity in the U.S. has changed significantly over that period. And there are expectations that competitive pricing, existing incentives, and commitments from many states and territories will lead to reductions in the use of existing unabated coal and gas power plants, while promoting even more growth in renewables and potentially in nuclear power and fossil fuel plants that are fitted with carbon capture technologies. And while the mix of supply technologies is changing significantly, so is the demand for electricity, particularly from personal vehicles, from heating and cooling, and from cooking. While the exact pathway that we're going to take over the coming decades is difficult to predict, a substantial increase in electricity demand is all but certain when we look at the numbers. This increased demand on the electricity sector will make reliability and affordability even more vital. In 2021, U.S. customers experienced an average of 7 hours without power, and this figure is significantly higher than some other comparable economies. And it looks even more dramatic when we dive in and look at the variation between states. So customers in Louisiana, for example, experienced over 80 hours without power. Customers in Oregon experienced losses of over 25 hours, and those in Texas, my home state, were without power for 20 hours. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave the U.S. energy system a C- grade in their latest assessment, and they identify severe weather as the predominant cause of outages. When we look at access to reliable, affordable, and clean energy, we see it as a major determinant of health, well-being, and economic prosperity. Extreme weather events, which are increasingly likely to come in the coming decades, strain underprepared power systems when people need them the most. Extreme heat increases the need for air conditioning, and home heating is even more vital in the middle of extreme winter storms. During winter blackouts, people seek alternative fuel sources such as charcoal, which has led to accidental deaths due to carbon monoxide poisoning. And when we look at access to health care, it is also hampered during power outages and extreme weather, leaving people with elevated health needs particularly vulnerable. And the economic effects of electricity outages are also severe. Estimates put the wider economic impact of Winter Storm Uri at upwards of $300 billion as just one example. More recently, Congress has provided leadership in supporting critical investment in clean energy innovation and infrastructure deployment in the Energy Act of 2020, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. And today, Congress has the opportunity to provide transformative leadership to ensure that the future electricity grid can support the delivery of reliable, affordable, and clean electricity to households and businesses around the country. In my written testimony, I outlined a number of recommendations for Congress to consider, and I'll highlight 3 here. One is strengthening the requirements for risk assessments and mitigation planning in power and sector planning processes. So coupling up something I talk about, which is energy systems models and climate models, so we're planning for the future and not for the past. The second is reforming environmental review and permitting processes for projects across the entire electricity sector. And I say that intentionally, the entire sector, so supply, the grid, the whole thing. And the third one that I'll highlight is finding ways to better utilize existing infrastructure and rights of way to accelerate projects that can provide near-term benefits. I provide more details on these topics and all of my recommendations in my written testimony. Again, I'd like to thank the committee for holding this hearing on reliability and resiliency of electricity in the United States in the light of these recent reliability assessments and alerts. The investments that we've made over the past 50 years have created an energy system that supports our health and well-being and our economy. And the investments that we make moving forward are vital. Thank you again for inviting me to be a part of this important discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Tudor.
Good morning, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the threats to electric reliability and affordability. This is a growing threat that I believe will have dire consequences for the American people and also creates a national security risk. My name is David Tudor. I'm the CEO of Associated Electric Cooperative based in Springfield, Missouri. We are a member-owned, member-led, not-for-profit wholesale electric utility that delivers power to 2.1 million, mostly rural people in Missouri, Oklahoma, and Iowa. Associated and its 6 transmission cooperative owners operate 5,700 megawatts of generation capacity and over 10,000 miles of transmission to serve 51 distribution cooperatives that are owned by the 2.1. We are not at a regional transmission organization, at RTO. In the RTO, the utilities pool their resources to serve their shared load. We have chosen to remain independent, which makes us fully responsible for serving our member owners. However, we have over 200 interconnects with SPP, MISO, and TVA. Associated Electric kept the lights on during winter storms Uri and Elliott when our neighboring utilities were forced into rolling blackouts. I'm honored to be given this opportunity to testify today, and I've submitted extensive written testimony with actual data from our experience. I believe I was invited today to share with you how we kept the lights on when others couldn't, and the challenges we're now facing and continuing to do so. Let me start with my 7 primary concerns. First, coal plants are being prematurely retired. According to EIA data, across the country, 86,000 megawatts have been retired since 2011. An additional 73,000 megawatts have been announced to be retired by 2028. The new EPA rules announced 2 weeks ago will likely lead to more retirements despite the legal challenges that will be filed. Second, There is no technology to deliver around-the-clock baseload electricity to replace this retired generation. It has to be tested, proven, financeable, and also connected to the transmission grid by 2028, when all these coal plants are retired. In fact, it's doubtful anything will be ready by 2035. Third, the queue, which has been spoken about this morning for new replacement generation in MISO, SPP, and PJM, is largely made up of intermittent resources, wind, solar, and battery storage. Only 3 to 4% is natural gas, a dependable resource. Fourth, these queues have major problems in that each generator site must be studied for system impact effects and the cost to upgrade the transmission system to accept them into the grid, all before work can even be started. Fifth, new transmission takes 4 to 6 years to build if the materials can be procured timely. The materials cannot today be procured timely. Transformers, conduit, and poles have their own queues. Sixth, the cost for new transmission continues to climb due to inflation and these supply chain challenges. Seventh, maybe most important, China and other countries continue to build coal plants while we're forcing ours to retire. It's the same error. Associated has chosen a path less traveled because we use data and experience to make business decisions. I want to be clear, we are not against renewables. I want to be clear also that we need all generation resources to keep the lights on. We do not pick arbitrary success dates on projects or make soft promises to retire a plant at a future date. We do not retire plants that are environmentally compliant without a real alternative that is reliable and affordable. Our members expect us to keep the lights on. We survived Storm Uri and Elliott because we have a balanced portfolio of coal, natural gas, hydro, and wind. Our data proves that without our coal, natural gas, and hydro plants, we would have incurred blackouts during both storms. Out of the 1,240 megawatts of wind that we have, only 179 megawatts at our peak of Uri, and only 552 megawatts during Elliott. That's less than 45%. We set 13 new all-time peaks during Elliott. Our fossil fuel plants and our independent transmission system saved the day. So what is the solution? The 3 T's: technology, transmission, and time. The technology will develop. The transmission can be built. We just need more time. We need to get control of the EPA, who doesn't seem to care about reliability or cost. We need to cut the red tape on permitting on all generation, transmission, and pipeline projects. And we need to use these IRA funds to find that technology we need so badly. In closing, this desire to put climate change objectives ahead of reliability in the United States is a risk not worth taking. It's not too late for you to take action. Thank you for having me today.
Let me thank all of you for your testimonies. We appreciate very much the input and your expertise. We'll start with our questions now, and I'm going to ask one for all the witnesses. What we've just heard in reliability being that it should be the driving force, and the only way you know that is when you lose power and why it wasn't prevented. So with that being said, we have NERC, we have FERC, we have EPA. EPA seems to trump everything with policy if they're going a different direction, and it looks like there's not much input. Do you all believe or don't believe it's necessary that NERC and FERC should have input in far as reliability when EPA is making these policy changes? Ms. Tudor.
Absolutely.
Ms. Lott.
I think that in all these processes, it's critical to keep what you highlighted in the beginning in mind: reliable and affordable electricity. And anything that affects the grid, we should understand the impacts of it.
But I'm saying if they're not listening to them, if NERC and FERC, they're doing their job, but there's no teeth to it whatsoever. Give you an example of what we're talking about. We have been working on bills here, directing the NERC to comment on EPA regulations, direct them to comment on your regulations. EPA must address NERC's comments before it issues the final rule. And then FERC can issue temporary waivers to regulations if needed for reliability. So somehow you have to have, reliability is going to be the first and foremost for people's lives, protect their lives, really livelihoods and lives. And that's what we're asking. If something is needed in that you all believe, seeing it from your standpoint, in legislation that might be helpful to give us more direction of reliability, not just changes that are desired.
Yeah, Senator Manchin, I can provide my perspective. I think absolutely. I think actually Senator Barrasso is thinking through the SPUR Act, and I think this concept of reliability impact statements to inform policy before it is made, I think is a great idea. I think actually we can go further, and I can talk about that later, but I think that is needed.
I think I know how you feel, Mr. Robb.
Well, we do reflect the impact of EPA policy.
How frustrating is it to you, being the head of NERC, knowing that you're giving basically on the facts, you're not picking winners or losers, you're not getting involved in environmental climates and in the fight that goes on, what side are you on? Basically just dealing with the facts of how you're supposed to deliver the power, and no one pays attention.
It's frustrating.
I would think so. Okay, here. And Mr. Masham, how's PJM adjusting to the market rules to ensure that you have dispatchable power that's needed to run your reliable grid?
Yeah, great question, Senator Manchin. So we're taking a lot of actions right now. I think before I get into those actions, I just want to note the markets have worked. They actually have delivered reliability. They've delivered the dispatchable generation we need for 20 years. And I think they'll continue to work. But what's different is there's this massive policy pressure. And I'm not sure that the markets or actually any...
Explain that massive policy pressure to what? Bring on more power or just, I mean, here, bring on renewable. We're all for all the above.
Yeah, and
wind, solar, all of this.
Yeah, it's really pressure for generators that are dispatchable to retire. And the retirement dates are not tied to demonstration that the replacement capacity is here, right?
Let me ask this question. If you shut down a coal-fired plant before it's timed out and it can still produce power 24/7, you're shutting it down because of policy pressures. Does the ratepayer still pay since it's been based in for a longer period of time to run?
It depends on the rate regime. So part of PJM is restructured, in which case the investors take that risk. In the fully regulated, integrated parts of the market, the ratepayers take that risk.
And
but so we're doing a lot to tweak our markets, to change our markets, to make sure we're recognizing the attributes that we need for a reliable grid, whether it's resource accreditation or how we run our auctions or how we actually penalize people who don't perform.
Very quickly, I think, Ms. Tudor, you made a comment that you don't think that we can meet it in time as far as you're saying all this in the queue, all this new energy coming on, waiting to get connected, correct? What happens if we don't build new transmission lines to carry this and bring it into the queue? Does it replace basically, and if it's not, if we don't have the storage and we can't store it, and basically it has to be either used or lost, what does it do to reliability?
I believe there's a tipping point that is going to occur in 2028 because all the plants that are announced to close in 2028, most of these coal plants are tied to specific regulations in the EPA, so they're going to close. So you've got between now and 2028 to come up with solutions, sir. Transmission is a solution. Keeping what we have past 2028 to maybe 2035 gives us a chance to actually see these technologies develop. The first SMR, small modular reactor, is scheduled to come on in 2029. That's the first one. And no one wants to be number one in new technologies. So my concern is we've got a gap period here that we've got this push for all these new renewables, and we have this push to shut down plants that work, and there's nothing there in the middle to save us, and I fear we are going to have blackouts, and I'm afraid we're going to see significant number of lives lost.
Thank you. Senator Barrasso.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Tudor, to follow up, so I want you to take a look at a chart that I have posted here. We have circled the area in green. That is the area served by your cooperative and its affiliates, as you mentioned, Missouri, Iowa, Oklahoma. So this chart is from NERC's 2022 Long-Term Reliability Assessment. It's entitled Risk Area Summary from 2023 to 2027. So red, high risk, orange represents elevated risk. The area that your cooperative serves appears as an oasis between the surrounded by red and orange, except you're in a good spot. So why is your area in such a good spot? What are you doing right that your neighbors are not doing right? And I'm going to just say through this so the other members, Senator Cassidy, as well as Senator Murkowski. The oasis among the.
Now, that's a good question.
It's where it belongs above all the rest.
To answer your question, sir, we have not retired our fossil fuel plants, number one. Number two, we invest in transmission projects to serve our members, to maintain affordable electricity to their homes. Our ability to have also 200 interconnects with SPP and MISO. We also have firm transmission to go across TVA to PJM, so we can access all three markets in those times when there's problems. Most of you know how storms go from the west typically to the east. And so our system sits right in the middle of these markets. And what we're concerned about, frankly, is over the next 4 or 5 years, so much of this coal generation is going to get retired in the Midwest that we believe that both MISO and SPP are going to become more and more less reliable. And we can't just open the breakers and keep them from affecting our system. So what we're worried about is we feel like we've done everything we can to protect our membership from a reliability standpoint, but those 200 interconnects are both a blessing and a curse. They're a blessing, to get extra power when we need it, which is very seldom. They're a curse because we will have loop flows, and a lot of people don't understand what that is, but electricity goes where it wants to, and you can't make it go a certain direction. So our fear is we're going to become less and less reliable, not because of our own actions, but because of the actions of others.
So a few weeks ago, Mr. Tudor, this committee held an oversight hearing. We had the FERC commissioners here. The chairman had made mention to it. During that hearing, Chairman Manchin asked each of the FERC commissioners whether, quote, it is possible to eliminate coal today or in the near future. All 4 commissioners agreed that we need coal to maintain grid reliability. Do you agree with the commissioners?
Yes, sir, I agree. And I believe you would hear from both MISO and SPP, as PJM has stated, that yes, we need to maintain some baseload generation, coal and natural gas, until we can get to a point where there's a new technology that can replace it.
And that's specifically for your own cooperative as well as across the nation?
It's the United States, sir.
Thanks. Mr. Robb, your organization's 2023 Summer Reliability Assessment shows risks spreading to even more regions than the assessment from last year, and your 2022 Long-Term Reliability Assessment showed much of the country at higher elevated risk, worse this year. So as utilities and cooperatives face greater pressure to retire coal and nuclear and even natural gas power plants, the grid faces even greater risk, as indicated by your chart. Based on these trends, is the electric grid at greater risk of failure today than it was, say, 10 years ago, 2013?
Unquestionably.
So I won't ask you to predict what's going to happen, but if current trends continue, what would you project the state of the grid to be 5 years from now in 2028?
Well, since you've both showed our maps, if the trends continue as they are today, we're going to see more of the country in orange and increasing areas in red. So more elevated risk across the country, more red areas of high risk. And when we do our next reliability assessment, we'll be baking in all these coal retirements that we're talking about today, and that's going to make almost the entire map orange.
So, well, Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time. Thank you. I'll go second round.
Thank you, Senator. Now we'll go to Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman.
Give me a second.
Dr. Lott, a recent study commissioned by ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, that I've got here, indicates that the reliability of conventional fossil-fueled thermal electric generation was reduced in cold years, particularly cold winters like 2024, like the year we had 2011 and 2021, by about 20 to 30%. So this is the thermal generation that we're all talking about. But in particularly cold winters, like 2011 and 2021, they saw a 20 to 30% decrease in reliability due to correlated outages that are caused by extreme weather events. In general, are we talking enough about the reliability of conventional gas and coal plants being overestimated in those windows, given the demonstrated risk from correlated outages?
In general, we're not spending enough time looking at the trade-offs and risks across all the different technologies and how they play together. And to a point that was made earlier, also the systems that are connected to them. You can have a natural gas plant, which will have its own risks, as one example. You also have to think about the entire fuel supply chain, so the pipelines, the storage, the wells heads.
Yeah, the valves that get stuck.
All of it.
Would it have been helpful during events like Winter Storm Uri if Texas could have actually imported bulk power from neighboring markets?
The ability to import is one additional tool in the toolbox. And in the middle of an extreme event, you want every tool available to you. So the fact that they had limited ability to do that meant they had one less tool to work with.
Mr. Astana, as of 2022, PJM had one of the largest interconnection backlogs in the nation for new generation storage projects. I believe it was about 280 gigawatts, at least according to the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab report that I saw. As you and others have pointed out, this backlog and the inability to add new generation sources on the grid is a challenge for reliability, for our ability to transition to cleaner resources. I'm curious, do you think that FERC's NOPR to address interconnection backlog issues is on the right track? And in addition, when you say interconnection reform, what specifically does that mean to you? What does that look like in particular?
Yeah, great question. So I'll take the second one first. The queues are full, and we need to get through them. There's no question about it. They're full because they're full of projects, some of which are going to go, and many of which are speculative. And we need to separate them and do our engineering work on the ones that are going to go. And so that's a lot of our reform that we've put in place right now, and it should get us through the queue in the next few years. Now, in terms of the FERC NOPR, we were in concept.
So specifically, you're saying if you just separate, I mean, how do you separate those two buckets? Because sometimes people are, you know, what one developer calls speculation, another developer says, no, we're putting that in the queue because we need acts, you know, we're betting that we can get a connection at that location.
Yeah.
How do you separate those two buckets of speculative and things that, from your point of view, are ready to go?
Our solution requires demonstration of site control. Okay. So you got to show that you've got the land and control of the site, and you have to be willing to put down financial deposits that are at risk to show that you're serious.
Great, that's helpful.
And with regard to the FERC NOPR, in concept, we were supportive of it. And we provided extensive comments. There were parts of it that we suggested needed tweaking, but I do think more proactive planning of the grid is going to speed up interconnection.
Mr. Rob, do you agree?
No, I agree with that. The one thing that we've pushed on from our perspective with the FERC NOPR is to ensure that inverter-based resources are correctly modeled before they're connected, and that's been a big issue.
You've indicated that the rapid growth of inverter-based renewable energy on the grid poses challenges for the bulk power system. However, you know, I was looking at NERC's 2022 report, the inverter-based resource strategy, and it actually says, implemented correctly, inverter technology can provide significant benefits to the bulk power system. Is there a disconnect there? Why is...
No, there's a big proviso in there of being integrated correctly.
Okay.
And the key issue here, the major issue with inverters is to make sure that they're able to ride through minor grid disturbances. We've seen a couple major events, most recently in West Texas, where a minor disturbance on the grid that would have cleared itself automatically caused a number of inverters to panic, if you will, and trip off the system. And since they all see that, we end up having very large outages. So in the most recent West Texas event, a minor disturbance would have been cleared naturally, resulted in 1,700 megawatts of inverters tripping off the system. That resulted in 800 megawatts of conventional generation tripping off the system. We lost 2.5 gigawatts, which is 2.5 nuclear units, and put ERCOT very, very close to having to shed load.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Now we have Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for organizing this hearing. Thanks to each of you for coming here to enlighten us. You know, it's become very popular to talk about the negative impacts of using coal and natural gas, but we really should have a conversation about the extent to which we rely on them and about the positive impacts of using them. The fact that the American people benefit from them in ways that can't simply be overlooked and dismissed. The reality is that human beings are able to survive and thrive much more readily, much more comfortably, much more affordably because of affordable and plentiful and reliable power, primarily coming from natural gas and from coal. And so the advantage that fossil fuel electric power generation provides isn't something that we can just ignore. It's something that makes it not only affordable, but also available on demand as baseload power on a consistent basis. We all benefit from that, from being able to walk into a room and turn on the light switch and know that the lights are going to come on and it'll be affordable and reliable. Now, sadly, we're seeing an all-of-government approach war on reliable power waged by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats in the Biden administration. Just as one of many examples, the Biden EPA has been on a crusade against coal-fired power plants, imposing crippling new regulations, what seems like every single week. Mr. Robb, I'd like to start with you. NERC, the organization that you lead, is the reliability watchdog for the grid. Is that fair to say?
That's a fair characterization.
And I think most of us can agree that coal-fired power plants are being retired prematurely, which is especially alarming when you look at the realities on the ground, when you consider things like the fact that when replacement baseload power supply has not been brought online, we need to be worried about this. Tell me why this trend should be troubling to us, or is it troubling to you?
It's highly troubling because we're retiring these plants before their attributes are being fully replaced. And their attributes are more than just the energy that they produce. One of the important things, it's a little esoteric, but one of the important things that these plants provide is the ability for the grid to maintain voltage and maintain frequency and to resist disturbances. Other resources can't do that nearly as well as large spinning mass generation. And that's why the loss of coal plants and natural gas plants and nuclear plants is so concerning from a grid reliability perspective.
Okay, so it goes beyond cost. It's about reliability, and without reliability, we lose some significant benefits. Now, requests for future generation published by the large regional transmission organizations, or RTOs, show that the vast majority of projected future generation additions are going to come from wind and from solar. For example, within MISO, one of the largest RTOs, solar and wind comprise 64% of new generator requests, while natural gas comprises only 3% of those requests. But given the retirement of dispatchable power, will this ratio of new wind and solar projects on the one hand to natural gas-fired projects on the other hand be sufficient to meet the need, the demand for reliable power in the coming decades?
It'll be highly problematic without reinforcing the natural gas system, which is very, very important for integrating renewables, and or the eventual development and deployment of long-duration energy storage, which as yet does not exist at scale.
Right. Mr. Tudor, you lead a large electric cooperative, and I've been very interested in your work, and I'm interested in your thoughts on why coal power plants are being forced to retire as they are, and why investment in new natural gas plants is seeming to be stifled. Tell me, do regulations like the EPA's good neighbor rule, do they make blackouts more likely or less likely?
More likely. Any premature retirement of something that works without having something that doesn't work to replace it seems dangerous to me and logical. So yes, there has been a continuous push to retire fossil fuel plants, mainly coal, and now move on to natural gas plants. And what it's done is it's
move on to them, meaning
retire
moving on to them to retire them,
yes,
force
sir.
their retirement,
or not even build any. And people are afraid to try and build something that's fossil when the EPA regs continue to come out that are negative to an investment of any kind in fossil fuels. So if you're sitting here going, am I going to build a windmill or am I going to build a gas plant? I'm going to build a windmill. Why? Because you can. And it will be very difficult for that 3% that we're talking about here of new natural gas plants to get permitted, get in the queue and get connected to the grid, and actually get built and completed. And it takes now 5 or 6 years to build a brand new natural gas plant, where it used to take 2 to 3.
In the meantime, they're not replacing that with nuclear power, traditional or small modular nuclear. They're not replacing
can't
that
yet.
with
Those-
geothermal or hydroelectric.
They can't yet because the technology is not there yet. I mean, there's a big difference between capacity, which is the ability to deliver energy, and energy. So if you take a wind product, which I'm not against wind, but wind in general gets about 15% capacity credit in the RTOs, where a coal plant gets around 80% capacity in a RTO. What that means is the coal plant produces and runs 80% of the time, and the wind farm runs 15% of the time. When it's windy, the wind produces a lot of energy, which is a good thing. When it's not, they virtually have nothing, and you have to rely, as Mr. Robb's saying, you have to rely on something that is base load to maintain the integrity of the service, basically to our consumers.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have, let's see, we have Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I've been listening to this hearing, it occurs to me there's an irony and a paradox embedded in the hearing. We've heard the word premature about 100 times. The question is, and I'll quote the testimony of Ms. Lott, the American Society of Civil Engineers identifies severe weather as the predominant cause of customer outage, right? It's in your testimony. We're in a race with climate change. And we're talking about outages that are caused predominantly by severe weather, which is a result of climate change. So the question is premature. Actually, we should have been making this transition years ago, and we're trying to make it in a hurry because we are in a crisis situation. For the last million years, CO2 in the atmosphere averaged about 260 to 270 parts per million. Starting in about 1850, that started to rise steadily. Today, it's at 424 parts per million. I remember 10 years ago when I entered this body, it was under 400, and everybody said 400 is a tipping point. We're at 424 today. That's a 60% rise in about 150 years. And by the way, the last time we were at over 400 parts per million was 3 million years ago, and the ocean was 60 feet higher. So the question is, and I understand that it seems to me the heart of this hearing is timing. And what is the time period? Is it 5 years or 10 years, Mr. Robb? I understand the testimony, and basically what you're saying is we're trying to transition too fast. My question, and this is an honest question, is what's the right time period that we should be aiming at?
It's a terrific question, and it's a very tough policy problem, and I have sympathy for
Could
those
the
who
record
do
show
this.
that terrific question quote, please?
I think I believe, and I think most people studying the energy system says you need to keep balance between affordability, reliability, and climate. And if one gets out of whack, then bad things start to happen. And I think your question at its roots has, how much do you value having 24/7 energy available to support the way of life we've all become accustomed to?
And how do you avoid a crisis that will overwhelm any electric system?
And that's the question of balance that policymakers need to figure out
So can you give me
and pursue.
a year? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Should we?
I think it
should we slow
depends.
the retirement of coal plants, which are definitely.
Yes, Senator, I think it depends on what you believe about our ability to create batteries or other forms of storage that can create synthetic dispatchability from intermittent resources like wind and solar.
It's not synthetic dispatchability, it is dispatchability. If you have batteries plus renewables, that's a baseload plant.
And the question is, at what time do we have the duration that we need? Because right now, a 4-hour lithium-ion battery is incredibly helpful to the grid. It doesn't solve the wind drought problem.
I completely understand that. So the question is, how fast can we develop the battery or the storage technology, whatever it is, whether it's pump storage or something else, versus the contribution to the severe weather events, which are also, we're talking about this hearing as if the only risk is a lack of capacity, when in reality, the risk is severe weather events. So we've got to try to be
And
the
issue is they're correlated, right? And we need to recognize that and find the right balance between them. But I think people need to understand the scale of this industry is enormous. So last year, we put 20 gigawatts of solar onto the system. That's the most we've ever put on in a single year.
That's only going to accelerate.
And that's only about 2% of the capacity of the United States. So even doing, with everything that we've done to speed the development of renewables and so forth, with a static grid, we're on a 50 to 75-year trajectory to replace it. And the grid's not static because we're also trying to electrify transportation, which is a very smart thing to do.
I'm running
Space
out of
heating.
time, but for the record, I'd like you to give me a number of years. How long should we delay the retirement of the fossil fuel plants, bearing in mind the acceleration of the climate risk?
I'm going to disappoint you, Senator. I can't give you a year. But we shouldn't retire them until they're replaced.
We've got to make decisions here as to, this whole hearing is about delaying the retirement. I want to know how long and how that relates to the rest of the risk. The other point I want to make, Mr. Chairman, we had a very informative hearing just before the break about small modular reactors, and this country is falling behind in that technology. There's a danger of us losing whatever advantage we might have. I think we're going to need a CHIPS and Science Act 2 with regard to the development of small modular reactors to accelerate that development here in the country, because that will answer many of the issues that we're discussing today, both climate and reliability. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling. This is an important hearing.
Very, very important. Thank you. Senator Cassidy.
Well, I think if there's a lesson here, I mean, if there's a meta lesson, is the regulatory state is often conflicted, and the regulatory state is creating an environment which is really with goals which are mutually incompatible. Mr. Tudor, you mentioned how the regulations are effectively forcing the retirement of coal-fired plants and inhibiting the development of natural gas. We have a limitation from the bureaucratic state of permitting for power lines, which could allow electrons to go from one place to the other. My chairman mentioned in his opening statements how EPA is not approving carbon storage projects, and yet theoretically we're trying to decrease the carbon footprint of all these projects. You know, of course, the line from Pogo always comes to mind in this situation. We've met the enemy and he is us, except this time, to be more specific, it is the bureaucratic state. So I'll say on a bipartisan basis, I think that a regulatory reform bill would actually be incredibly helpful, that could actually help develop goals that are mutually held by both sides if we want to achieve anything. Because right now, Mr. Tudor, you're suggesting we're heading for a train wreck. Now, if you notice on that thing that Senator Lee's head was blocking earlier, I was trying to get around his ears to see.
We've been trying that for a long time.
Louisiana, which is part of the MISO, is considered at high risk. We don't have that much dispatchable renewable, but we obviously have a lot of storms coming off the Gulf, and I assume that's why we were considered at high risk. In the bipartisan infrastructure bill, Mr. Robb, there was $3 billion for distributed energy, $3 billion to harden the grid, and $3 billion to tie the two together. Now, what do you see as the potential for this distributed energy build-out to give resiliency to these weather events that Senator King was speaking of?
I think the movement to push more generation closer to load is a good one, right? And I think distributed generation, as you're referring to, is a positive trend. The challenge with it is that most of that distributed energy is coming on in the form of inverters, largely photovoltaic, some wind, and eventually we're going to see more and more batteries. We need to make sure that those inverters play nicely with the rest of the
Now,
system.
I was told by somebody who's very much into this, so you always have to kind of understand it here from different sources, that if you took a microgrid connected to a battery, that would give you 4 hours of power, which may be enough to get you back up. The thought came when you mentioned how in West Texas, the inverter flipped off. But if it was storing into the battery, then putting right back on, would that not have dealt with the issue?
The combination of inverter resources and batteries is a very powerful one, but you need to be cognizant of the scale and duration of protection that you're getting. 4 hours is 4 hours, which is terrific if you got a 3.5-hour event. If you have a 2-week outage associated with a major hurricane, if you have 6 weeks of cloud cover that you can't generate from, you need longer duration storage than 4 hours.
So it's part of the solution, but it is not the solution.
It's definitely part of the solution, but other things need to happen around it.
Let me just ask you, do you agree with Mr. Tudor that the EPA's regulations are forcing the early retirement of assets and that we in no way, under the current regulatory regime, have any possibility of replacing it with suitable renewables and transmission to make up for it?
Not in the time frame that we're looking at, no.
So you agree with his testimony in
I
the
do.
main? And Mr. Estana, do you agree?
I do agree we need to hang on to resources that we have today that work until their replacement is here.
But would you also agree that the regulatory state is basically making that impossible? You're a regulated industry, so you may be a little hesitant, but you can just surreptitiously nod your head yes.
Well, I was trying to give you a thoughtful answer. I do think that I've said the policy pressure is what is pushing most of this generation off. So that is true. I was really hesitating because the most recent EPA rule is a proposal, and so I'm not sure where it will end up. But if it ends up the way it is, it will continue to push this generation off the grid.
I think Mr. Tudor's point that even their proposal ends up guiding bond markets. James Carville said he once wanted to come back as a bond market because everybody listened to the bond market. So who's going to float a bond for fossil? I think that was Mr. Tudor's point.
Yeah.
And Dr. Lott, would you agree with all that?
I think the system is not set up right now to support at the speed we need the diverse mix of technologies we need. If you want a reliable and affordable grid in any future scenario, you want a mix of things. You want variable renewables like wind and solar. They're very cheap when they're around. We want to complement it with energy storage, both batteries for these short periods of time and the long duration we're establishing. We also want firm dispatchable power. And I say that as a group of technologies. This could be geothermal, hydro,
I accept
fossil
that,
fuels.
but it also means that we're going to have regulatory reform if we hope to achieve that. Would you agree with that? And the time required.
We need processes that can provide transparency, speediness, so that we can build things, yes.
And do we have that now?
Our processes are not set up to do the number of things we're trying to do.
I'll just finish by saying that should be the challenge of this committee to come up with that regulatory reform bill on a bipartisan basis. I yield.
Thank you, Senator. Now we have Senator Hickenlooper from the great state of Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank all of you for your work and for being here. I think this has been very useful. I did want to point out that Walt Kelly's great quote that you is my father's favorite cartoon, Pogo. But that was on the reason that's so famous in 1970, he put that on an environmental poster. And he was really talking about the causes of pollution and environmental challenges that we created. He also, what was the other one we had here? Having lost sight of our objectives, we redoubled our efforts, which is something that this committee has to be very careful of. Also, he said that we are faced with insurmountable opportunities. I mean, could go down the long list. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Mr. Estana, I saw in your testimony that PJM is over 250,000 megawatts. It's been brought up a couple different times as we discussed. The PJM's recent analysis identified several concerning trends that could result in a capacity shortfall, as you recognize. You also considered different scenarios regarding how quickly we could bring on new generation. You could bring on new generation. Can you talk a little bit about the high new entry scenario in which you're able to get a lot of generation out of interconnection queues and onto the grid, how does that impact the risk of blackouts and future interruptions?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Great question. So we have said we see 40,000 megawatts at risk of retiring by 2030. To replace it, we need 100,000 megawatts of the intermittent generation. We have 250,000 in the queue, so it's doable, right? Our interconnection reform will move that generation through the queue in time to get built. The problem is the completion rates of those projects are really low. So we're going to need to get 50, 60% completion rates when we're seeing 5 to 10% because of issues like supply chain constraints, permitting, and the like. So it's doable, but I wouldn't want to bet the farm that it will be done given the current trends. I think we need to push to get it done, but I think we need to not burn the boats in terms of the generation that we have in the meanwhile.
Right, thank you. As Senator King pointed out, and you've all pointed out, that the pressure that's coming to make these changes more rapidly really is coming from the public. I mean, the EPA in many regards is feeling that pressure, which is the occurrence of extreme weather. I remember, I've got my master's now, it's almost 50 years old, but in earth and environmental science, and you go back, and back then we called it the greenhouse effect, but as early as the mid to late 1980s, we began predicting extreme weather was going to be a consequence of climate change as we saw it. When I first became mayor of Denver in 2003, we had some of the worst wildfires we'd ever had. They've only gotten worse continuously in a cycle. The question I have for each of you, if we're going to do this properly and measure, as Senator King was describing, how do we balance reliability with the urgency to address climate change before the extreme weather accelerates to a point where we really can't deal with it, which is not impossible to imagine? Do you think a price on carbon helps us creates a system where we can assess these competing urgencies that I think we're all faced with right now? Why don't we start with you, Mr. Tudor, and we can go right down the list.
Well, selfishly, I don't want to pay any more taxes.
Well, if the money was all given back as a dividend.
Sure, I understand. In the past, tradable markets have had a positive effect on the reduction of emissions.
Great.
They have, yes, sir.
Dr. Lott?
So one of my colleagues at the Center on Global Energy Policy, Dr. Noah Kaufman, works on this quite a bit. Putting a price on these things, as you say, has succeeded in the past when it comes to addressing things like acid rain, and it is one tool that can be deployed.
Yeah, and I don't underestimate the complexity of getting to doing this in a way that would be perceived as fair and just. Mr. Asana?
Yes, I do think a price on carbon can get us to a more efficient solution to carbon mitigation.
Great.
As NERC, I don't think we have a point of view on that.
Yeah, it has become a more political problem probably than it needs to be or should be. And it certainly was generated by Republicans and Democrats, but I keep circling back because so many people in Congress have given up on it. And it is the one sure way to avoid, to find out a solution whereby government gets their finger off the scale and where we let some of these systems that we all recognize are complex but important, that allow the system to generate its own priorities. Mr. Tudor.
I would prefer that to the latest EPA rule on 111B and D, and because what that does is exactly what you're saying, is it forces things into unintended consequences. I'd much rather have a market to cause that versus unintended consequences of set rules that will require retirements.
No, I understand that, and I appreciate what Dr. Lott said in terms of, as we look at revisiting the processes that we use to look at that type of rulemaking, how do we make sure we can maintain the transparency? We can accelerate the time, but we've got to make sure we protect the role of the public in having an opportunity to discuss their own future as well. Yield back to the ranking member.
Thank you, Senator Hickenlooper. Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Senator Brasso, and thank you all for being here today. This has been so helpful, and obviously we have a lot of challenges in front of us that are very, very critical. Mr. Tudor, I'm going to direct my question to you. the strains on the nation's electric grid to an electric sector continues to be played by the things you've talked about, the supply chain issues, the labor shortages, the natural disasters, the reliance on foreign countries for equipment, and so on. We're also seeing that the challenges facing our grid infrastructure are only heightened by the aggressive green agenda being pursued by the Biden administration. So from your perspective, can you just talk about the consequences that the American people see if these issues are left unaddressed?
I apologize, you're asking me. I couldn't.
Yes.
Okay. Very good question. Difficult to answer. I have to revert back to probably the largest issues. Supply chain challenges are worse than they've ever been. Minerals to actually create renewable projects are 70–80% managed and controlled by China. You have to construct things. So when we talk about implementation, the first thing we have to do is we have to invent, develop, and then ultimately deploy whatever resource we're talking about, whether it's wind, solar, batteries. And I agree with Dr. Lott. It's just not prime time yet. We're not ready. And we've had some unique things happen that have caused this to slow down. A big one being COVID, which created then supply chain challenges. A strong economy led to that, and this growth spurt. And so I think that we need to answer Senator King's question. I think we need to at least 2040 to maintain fossil fuel plants and make a smooth transition to a cleaner United States. That doesn't fix the world. It will just fix the United States because China is going to continue to build coal plants. That answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you.
And also to you that, with Winter Storm Elliott, the strike that we had in the Southeast, there were certainly reliability problems and concerns, including the rolling blackouts, and it seemed that the region recovered pretty quickly. But the customers did not see the extreme economic impact like they did in Texas or that they might see in a market like New England that lacks firm gas. So do you attribute this in part maybe in the market structure in the Southeast or specifically the vertically integrated bilateral market?
Storms are unpredictable, and we have actually looked back at our region and looked at weather trends. And when was the coldest day in Missouri, Oklahoma, and Iowa? It was actually in 1989, not in December of 2022. What happened in the Southeast is somewhat unique, because, as well as Texas, because they're not used to these storms dipping down as deep and as cold. So what we experienced in Elliott was effectively 20 and 30 degrees below zero with wind chills and wind up to 50 miles an hour. Very unique storm. It's happened before, but the Southeast effectively, I think, got caught by the same thing all of us got caught by, and that is bad weather forecasting. I think most utilities in the United States during Storm Elliott missed their load forecast. And when everybody misses their load forecast, Jim knows what that means. You're short everywhere of generation. And if you don't have that generation on and operating before the storm, it's very difficult to get that generation to come on during a storm. So from a market construct standpoint, I continue to advocate that we allow the RTOs to actually bring on baseload generation in front of a storm and curtail other forms of energy for that window of time where they need to get the baseload generation up and running in advance of a storm.
Thank you. And I have another question, but I'll submit it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. I agree with my colleagues. This has been a really informative discussion. Let me follow up, because this was the question I was going to ask you, Mr. Tudor, was what is the appropriate time frame? And you said 2040. Why 2040?
I don't think, first of all, I don't think hydrogen or carbon capture will be ready anytime soon. Mm-hmm. I think our best opportunity for having a real resource that can replace fossil fuel plants is small modular reactors, which is nuclear. The problem there is the permitting process and the cost that these organizations have to spend to get through that permitting process is enormous. And ultimately, that results in a cost of a small modular reactor of close to 10 times more expensive than a brand new gas-fired plant. Over time, I think those costs will come down, but they need the time to develop that product. And when I develop it, deploy it, test it so it can be financeable. Banks are not going to loan money on something they don't know whether it works or not, especially in advance when your cost curve is so high and over so many years. The first SMR scheduled to come online is in 2029 with a company called NuScale. We have signed a letter of intent with NuScale specifically, as well as GE Hitachi, to track this technology and consider it, but we don't see it happening until 2035. And we don't even know if it works yet.
So let me ask you this. And it goes back to what Senator King was saying, is we knew about extreme weather impacting and making this change and directing us to do something years ago. So if the administration doesn't put out some sort of incentive or goal marker or something out there, how can we ensure the industry and people, it's not just the federal government, right? The regulation comes at the state level, public utility commissions, local regulation, we all know that. How will we ensure, and then the industry, everybody's going to work towards that goal? And so I guess this is a question for Dr. Lott, because you touch on this in your testimony, and I appreciate that, which is this idea that there is a role at the federal level. The U.S. regulatory framework for the electricity sector is overseen by state legislatures and public utility or service commissions. But you identify that the federal government has a role, and then you list a number of things. One of the things you talk about is that Congress could consider strengthening requirements for risk assessment and mitigation planning in power sector planning processes. Can you discuss that? And would that address what we are trying to achieve here without putting a time? We need an off-ramp of some sort, and for everybody to be a part of this. Would that help pull in this conversation what we need to be thinking about?
Thank you for the question. It's a great one. When we talk about the integration of how we plan our energy systems, what I'm highlighting in my testimony is that we have tools available today. They exist largely within our national labs, specifically Argonne National Lab. I'll give an example in a second, where we can do energy systems planning, and we use those models in conjunction with climate models that capture these changes that are already happening, that are already in progress today, in a way that allows us to design a system that will be reliable, resilient, and affordable moving forward. Right now, those models don't talk to each other. The specific example I was alluding to is a partnership between the New York Power Authority and the National Lab and Argonne National Lab to actually do this kind of risk assessment. We've seen this done outside of the energy sector for the telecommunications sector. Florida, AT&T, how should we build out our network of wires there to keep comms up? And we can do that now for the energy system. So we aren't not seeing risks that we already are facing today and therefore unable to invest to
But not all power authorities are doing this. Not all power authorities are partnering with labs to do this risk modeling, correct?
And there's a tremendous opportunity to make it so that those risks have to be included
and you
have to
think
be
there's
considered.
A role for Congress to play to
Absolutely.
incentivize somehow or mandate that type of modeling being done?
Because the risks are happening. We have the science and modeling and technology to assess it. So there's an opportunity for Congress to act to make sure that we are assessing that risk.
Okay. That's helpful. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Senator Cortez-Master, I wanted to answer part of your question around timing as well. Like more than half of our queue is solar. Solar works. It's here today. We need to accelerate it. I mean, I don't think it's a binary thing where we'll get to a date and we'll be ready. I think we're going to transition. The transition is happening now. I think we need to make the new generation come faster. It's just a question of the existing generation that firms the grid. I think we need it. It'll probably run less as the new generation comes in because the new generation has a zero marginal cost. So we'll dispatch it first. But when it dries up, when we don't have sun, we do need the backup. Mm-hmm. So that's the issue. I don't think we should think of it as there's a date and then we'll be ready. I think it's happening now.
Mr. Robb, you feel the same way?
No, I agree with that. I think keeping the foot on the gas on the deployment of renewable generation, deployment of batteries, development of new technologies such as small modular reactors, long-duration storage, all that needs to pursue at an extraordinary pace. We just need to keep the other stuff around because we need to have that in case of emergency break glass capacity we can rely on.
Thank you. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Tudor has one response to that. Is that all right? I know my time is up.
Let it go.
Okay, Mr. Tudor.
I think the IRA funding will actually be the incentive that's needed to continue this path for the development of renewables. I don't think you need anything else. I think it's going to cause it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Now we have Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We're so blessed. We are so blessed with your arrival.
Well, I wanted to be here for you.
I know.
Okay. So, Mr. Robin, May 4, FERC Commissioner Mark Christie testified before this committee that the United States is headed for a reliability crisis. Commissioner Danley also emphasized that concern in his testimony before this committee as well. Do you agree with Commissioners Christie and Danley?
I do.
Mr. Asthana, do you agree as well?
Sir, I didn't hear the quote, sir.
That we're headed for, both Christie and Danley have said we're headed for the United States is heading for a reliability crisis.
I do think there's an increasing risk of that.
Mr. Tudor, would you agree with that?
Yes, sir, I do. And sometimes people forget that electricity is our way of life, and without electricity, we don't have water.
Good point. Dr. Lott, do you agree with that?
I agree that we're not making the investments we need to maintain a reliable system.
Okay, and each, let's see now for Mr. Robb, Mr. Asthana, and Mr. Tudor, in each of your written testimonies, you note significant concerns over the retirement of on-demand dispatchable generation. Now, in my state of North Dakota, we have a 700-year supply of coal just in my state, and we are leading the nation forward in carbon capture and storage technology. We're already doing it on a plant, Dakota Gasification Company, that converts lignite coal to natural gas and also to fertilizer and produces other important elements as well, like krypton and xenon and so forth. Huge plant. Half its CO2 will go for tertiary oil recovery, the other half, and already is, and the other half will be carbon capture. We have another plant that is investor-owned, that is advancing with carbon capture, and we have another one that is owned by cooperatives that's advancing with carbon capture. Doesn't it make sense for us to do everything we can to help deploy those carbon capture technologies to keep that base load on the grid for reliability when we've done that with SOx, we've done that with NOx, we've done that with mercury, and now we're doing it with CO2. So rather than just coming out and saying, well, we can't have this kind of fuel or we can't have that kind of fuel or we have to retire this base load and we can only have this, wouldn't it make sense to continue to advance the technology, not only because it will address the situation here in this country, but because the rest of the world will adopt it as well? Isn't that a better solution than just shutting down plants?
I think investments that can enable the continued operation of coal plants or natural gas plants would be an extraordinarily valuable technology for us to have and deploy.
Right. And isn't it myopic if we just sit here and say, well, we're going to shut down our plants while China continues to build more and more and more? And there are a lot of other countries in the world that have an impact on the global climate, wouldn't you say?
I would agree that it's the same error.
Okay, Mr. Asthana, what's your thought on that question?
Yeah, I think carbon capture sequestration is a critical technology because our fossil reserves are a huge national security advantage for us. Now, I will say this. I think the most recent EPA proposed rule is trying to actually promote carbon capture and sequestration, but it's on a date certain, and it's not clear to me that the technology will be ready on that date. But I do think we need to keep pushing.
Mr. Tudor, what's your thoughts? And there's a difference between talking about it and making sure that you help people do it, right? You might want to add on that component
Yes, sir.
as well.
In
other words, if you're putting regulations in place all the time that prevent somebody from doing it, and then you're talking about like you're actually trying to pretend to help them, that isn't necessarily constructive to solving the problem, is it?
No, sir. I agree that we should spend incremental time and energy and money towards development of carbon capture, including allowing some other states allowing us to actually inject the carbon in those states. You're one of the few in the country that allows that. So if a power plant is in Arkansas, they need to be able to inject the carbon in Arkansas. Otherwise, it's really expensive to build pipelines to get it to North Dakota.
Right, but you can't profess that you want to help them capture carbon and then pass regulations that prevent them from doing it because it's unrealistic and defeat through delay, right?
Yes,
That'd be kind of like talking through your hat, wouldn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really appreciate the conversation here today. This is probably as important as anything this committee can possibly take up is what this transition looks like, because we are in this time of transition, and it is about timing. I don't think it really is fair to assign a date when you're talking about a transition. You can have some benchmarks along the way. You can have some guideposts that get you there. I like Senator Cassidy's idea about this committee looking to some level of regulatory reform, because it's through some consistency with regulation that you will send that signal to the markets, to the investors, that this is the direction that we're headed, and when you've got investment following, it's amazing what can happen in this country right now, but timing is just so hard. And I so get the fact that we are at this very, very, very awkward teenage pimply stage where we need to ramp up and look towards the new future here, but we can't shed too quickly what we have relied on in the past. But the problem is we can put in place incentives. We can put in place some regulatory support to build us out going forward, but it's really hard to find the money to keep the doors open for aging technology that needs to be maintained, that nobody's interested in anymore. And yes, it's keeping the lights on, but it still costs money. And to the point that Senator Cassidy made about regulatory reform, it's not only hard to find the resources to keep the older stuff alive, but we now put in place newer regulations imposed on that make the cost of that even more extraordinary. So it's just a hard transition that we're in. We really haven't talked about affordability, and that is such a key part of it, because you can talk about reliability all you want, but if you can't afford it, let me tell you, people in my state say that's not very reliable, and we see it all the time. We've had great success recently in building out water and sewer sanitation systems in small villages, but by the time we get them operational, the systems are so expensive, people cannot afford to hook up. When the cost of power is so high in communities where it's cold and dark in the wintertime, and you can't afford it, you turn to what you have, which is burning wood, and sometimes it's green wood, and we're dealing with particulate and emissions that are really complicating this change. If it's all about climate, we're not making people healthier, and it's because of the affordability piece of it. And Dr. Lott, I noticed that in your comments with response to just about everybody here, you say it needs to be reliability, but also affordability. You have focused on that, which I appreciate, and I don't think that we can lose sight of that. It's interesting to note that just a couple days ago, the U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA, reported that energy insecure households were billed more for energy than other households. And so I look at that, and I'm concerned that as we're talking about reliability and what that means and what this means in terms of transition and timing, that the affordability piece of it is going to be the expendable piece, because we got to keep the lights on. Well, you'll be able to keep the lights on for those who can afford it. You'll be able to keep the air conditioning on for those who can afford it, the heat on for those who can afford it. And what do we do about the most energy insecure? That's an open-ended question. You have 45 seconds. Dr. Lott.
Thank you for the 45 seconds. Today, the conservative number is that 1 in 3 Americans are already energy insecure. They pay a huge amount of their income for their energy bills, or they simply don't turn on the heater in the winter or the air conditioner in the summer because they know they can't afford it if they do that, and they would risk losing their homes. So when we talk about this affordability question, this is why I tried to highlight strongly in my testimony 2 things. One, that any types of policies and regulations need to not just think about power plants, but all the supply technologies that go into them, the grid, and also the demand side, to the point that you made around, I'm in a small home, I'm low income, it is probably less energy efficient than someone who's in a twice as size home, and so I'm paying more for my energy bills. And so when we think about managing demand, it's not just about folks who can reduce their load during a winter storm event. It's also about being more efficient in the first place and making sure that fundamentally people are staying safe and healthy in their homes. And so the other point that I highlight in here, the second point, is around having a diverse set of technologies that have different types of characteristics. The information indicates that if we go to a net zero future all the way by mid-century, in that scenario, we still need the same amount of firm dispatchable power capacity-wise as we have today. So we need those technologies to complement all the variable renewables, all of the grid investments we make, all of the storage to keep things affordable.
Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time, but this is not an easy issue for us, but it's certainly one that we need to step into.
Not at all. And we'll go very quickly to Senator King, and then we'll come back to Senator Hawley.
Senator Hawley hasn't had a first round yet. So.
You have to go. You have to go preside.
I have to preside. Is that all right? Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions, Mr. Asthana. We haven't talked about other technologies like demand response, and I have an expensive thermostat in my house which I can control. I've cut my energy use in my home here in Washington by 30% in the last 6 months by using this thermostat that you can turn it off during the day when you're not there. Are there other technologies that we should be talking about, and are they being sufficiently developed and utilized?
Yeah, I think energy efficiency, demand response, and then using the spare capacity that we have on the grid that's going to show up in the form of vehicles and batteries that are plugged in, sort of not building that again, finding ways to reuse that when it's plugged in, I think is going to be a big part of the future. And we are piloting those technologies. In fact, PJM has, I think, one of the premier demand response programs in the world. And it's a key part of maintaining reliability. And I think the importance of demand response is only going to grow.
Thank you. I want to join my other colleagues talking about bipartisan permitting reform. It's something we have to do in order to achieve whatever the future looks like in terms of green energy. It's going to require building things. And Mr. Tudor pointed out, for example, we're overly dependent upon China for lithium, which is an essential part of EV batteries. So we have to talk about permitting reform in a reasonable period of time to get things done. There were some permitting reforms in the budget deal that we're talking about, voting on in the next 24 hours, hopefully. But they didn't, there's a lot that wasn't done. For example, transmission has to be part of it. Mr. Robb, isn't that correct, that we really have to talk about being able to construct a new transmission?
No question, and it needs to be done much more quickly than we're able to do today.
And a final piece is, we haven't talked too much about the pipeline system, but in New England, the gas pipeline system is part of the grid. And I believe that FERC should have more responsibility in terms of gas pipelines and reliability and cyber protection, given the integral role that the gas pipeline system plays in the operation of the grid at the current time. Do you agree?
I agree with that, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of the witnesses for being here. I want to particularly say hello to and welcome Mr. Tudor of a Springfield-based Associated Electric Cooperative. I say Springfield-based, that would be Springfield, Missouri-based, which is also my hometown. So it is great to have you here. And I know the rural parts of my state in particular appreciate the work that Associated has done. Many times I think rural areas are overlooked, even when we're talking about something as important as the grid system. And so I want to thank you for the work that you do. I was really struck by these statistics in preparing for today's hearing. Associated, your cooperative, Mr. Tudor, provides power predominantly to older individuals. 57% are over the age of 57, 33% over the age of 65, and folks on lower incomes. which is pretty typical for rural areas of Missouri and for other states, and yet you do it at some of the most affordable rates in the nation. Talk to us a little bit about your co-op model, why you think it works, and what we can all learn from it.
Thank you, sir. We're a little bit different. Sometimes we affectionately call ourselves a unicorn. We sit, between the RTOs. My predecessor chose not to join an RTO years and years ago. When I arrived 7 years ago at Associated, we looked at joining MISO or SPP, and we decided not to for a lot of reasons. We support the market structure. We do a lot of business with MISO and SPP. We're just different. Missouri, as you know, is kind of the show-me state, and that lends itself to a significant amount of independence. And so our membership, our customers, our member owners, our transmission owners, our management team really believes that that we'd prefer to operate our own assets, including our transmission system, and be responsible for serving our own load. So what's different is RTOs, that's all blended, where there's 100 utilities, and they're least cost dispatching. But to the point of, from affordability standpoint, we do have some of the lowest rates in the country. Our transmission rates are, about a fourth of what the RTO transmission rates are. And it's because we only build transmission for load, for what our members need. It's a little different. I think that's going to change. I think we're going to have to build more transmission to facilitate more renewables all around us. Otherwise, we will become a linchpin for the MISO and SPP renewable development, and we are actually looking at that.
Let me ask you a little bit about some of the challenges you face. In your testimony, you referenced how, on the one hand, we're retiring dispatchable coal generation at a really pretty remarkable rate. I think it's 86,000 megawatts retired since 2011, another 73,000 megawatts predicted by 2040. In our state, in the state of Missouri, we've relied on coal for 74% of the state's power as recently as 2021. So talk to me a little bit about the challenge we face when we think about wind and solar energy, more intermittent, less reliable than coal, natural gas, nuclear. How do we think about the reliability issues and address those?
We believe in renewables. There have been some comments earlier today. We have renewables. We have about 1,240 megawatts of wind and 500 megawatts of hydro allocation. The challenge is that during many of these weather events, we either get a lot of wind or no wind. And so in trying to plan for weather events when they come along, whether it be the summer or the winter, the challenge around wind and solar and batteries is that it's not 4 hours. It's typically days. Uri was about 8 days of temperatures at 0 or below. And Elliott was shorter, but the wind chills were more significant. When things get cold, we had a number of the wind farms froze, but our fossil fuel plants, because they're already running, they have a tendency to perform better. I'm not a coal guy. I'm just about providing low-cost electricity to my members, and we know what works. Our fossil fuel plants work in today's environment. In the future, I agree with many things that have been said today, and that is if we could get to an orderly transition that allows us to make changes in the type of generation that everyone relies on, we're all for that, but that generation doesn't exist yet. There is nothing out there to replace a coal plant. It's not there.
Yeah. Thank you for your testimony on this. I've got some more questions I'd love to ask you. For the record, I appreciate what you do for my state and for Springfield and the whole region. Thank you for being here. Thanks for the other witnesses for being here. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back.
Thank you, Senator. We're going to have a quick second round, and Senator Hickenlooper, if you want a second round, I'll come to you. And if you want to stay for a second round, if you had a real quick question. Let me just say, first of all, everything we've talked about has been around permitting. We know where our challenges are, and anything to be done in a timely basis that you can make a determination is you should see something coming online, and I think you all talked about this, how desperate. We've made some inroads on permitting, in the bill that we hopefully for our debt ceiling will pass tonight. I think we all benefit from that. But this committee has an awful lot more to do, on permitting. And I think everyone here has been intricate in playing that part. In a bipartisan way, we can show in this committee how we can further our permitting process by continuing to keep our nose to the grindstone and getting this done as quickly as possible. Just a few things. First of all, in this committee's jurisdiction, electric transmission siting, cost allocation, and interconnection queue reform, judicial review forms for energy and mining projects, improved federal energy leasing for all types and sources, better community engagement input on project development, ensuring FERC and NERC have necessary authorities to address reliability as we discussed today, and in many other ideas we consider that are priorities for members on both sides of this committee, including streamlining hydrogen infrastructure, hydropower licensing, mining law reform, streaming LNG exports, and so much more. We're not saying that by any means do we think that with the bill that we're going to pass today to keep our great country paying its bills and keeping our credit rating strong has done everything needs to be done. So I wanted all of you to know, just stay tuned, keep involved. We'll be calling on you all to help us get through that, but we're going to be very vigorously involved in that process. So now we'll go with our second round. Senator Cantwell, I'm sorry. Oh, she snuck in on me.
Thank you.
Senator Cantwell, for her first round of questioning.
Thank you. Thank you. I thank Senator Barrasso and you for holding this hearing, and thanks for the recognition on this. And Mr. Chairman, you were just talking about important issues that I believe in too. I think fiber is a great way to add affordability, help us increase the security layer, provide backhaul middle mile capacity, bring affordable essential broadband to households and businesses. I was pleased to introduce legislation that you've been supportive of, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Capito has been supportive, a bill that's supported by Edison Electric, National Rural Co-ops, and utilities. I'm going to ask Mr. Robb and Mr. Asthana and Dr. Lott, do you agree that expanding communication capacity of the grids, existing right-of-ways, could provide significant benefits for reliability, resiliency, and modernization?
Wasn't really prepared to talk to that issue, but I think expansion of communication accessibility for utilities, particularly in emergency response areas, is very important.
Yeah, I would definitely support what Jim said. I think from a communication perspective, what we really worry about is communication in a crisis, right? When the grid is down, when we're black starting in a cyber attack, how do we communicate? And I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
That's why I'm for a closed loop network. I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr. Lott.
To say I agree, my first recommendation is making sure that we have strong communication networks for when incidents do occur.
Right, and I think people don't quite grasp this. I think even some people in the administration, that you can have a better security communication closed loop network by doing this fiber, and so we're supportive of it. We also want to see mandatory and comprehensive standards on millions of miles of natural gas, oil, and hazardous liquid pipelines. I'll be introducing legislation to ensure that FERC has a clear role in protecting our pipelines from cyber attacks. Mr. Robb and Mr. Asthana, do you believe that reliability of America's pipeline system is at risk due to the growing number of cyber attacks? Do you believe that FERC has been setting for the bulk of power sectors have increased? Do you believe that the reliability and interconnection of that with the pipeline system is something that we have to address?
I can't speak for the pipeline system broadly. What I can tell you, Senator, is that it's absolutely clear to me that the reliability and security of the natural gas pipeline system is heavily linked to our ability to serve customers through the electric grid. So those systems are absolutely interlinked. Second point I would make is that the FERC-approved SIP standards that we've developed as NERC for the electric sector have done their job in terms of protecting the grid from cyber attacks. And we would be well served to expand those to address the pipeline system. And the third point I would make is that the one common denominator event in every cold weather event we've studied over the last 15 years has been fuel supply related to natural gas being available for power generators. It's a complex problem. It's not as simple as it sounds, but it needs to be addressed.
Thank you.
Senator, I serve on the NIAC, and so we do study the linkages between the critical sectors. And I think this linkage between gas and power is critical, particularly in a cyber attack scenario, but also in a natural disaster or extreme weather scenario.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that answer and what we need to do to shape it up. Mr. Robb, during last year's heat wave in California, the Pacific Northwest Hydro provided 7 to 8 gigawatts of energy so its neighbors could keep the lights on. How important is it to ensure that clean, reliable power can be dispatched when the grid gets distressed? Senator Daines and I have introduced legislation along with Senators Wyden and Risch that would streamline and expedite hydropower relicensing to ensure the resources stay online. Do you think this idea is a good, what we're talking about here, a good proposal, the Daines-Cantwell hydro relicensing?
Without knowing the details of the bill, what I will say is that hydropower is an outstanding resource. It's clean, it's dispatchable, and it plays a huge role in the Western interconnection, as you probably know. So I think anything that can expand and secure that resource for the future is highly valuable.
Anybody else? I see some nodding.
The only thing I'd build on Jim's answer is, in addition to run-of-river hydro, we actually have some significant pumped hydro storage, essentially batteries, on our system, and I think those are incredibly valuable, and we'd love to see more.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning pump storage. Thank you.
I agree.
Okay, great.
So briefly, we often talk about coal and natural gas as sources of firm power and also backup when demand spikes, but hydro, nuclear, geothermal, these are also tremendous resources to provide that power.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Barrasso.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to follow up on some of the things that Dr. Hawley has been talking, Senator Hawley has been talking about to Mr. Tudor, and you know, because you're the only witness here today who runs an organization that actually produces electricity. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Uinta County, Wyoming, our Rural Electric Association, where their mission, assigned mission since 1938, is to provide safe, affordable, reliable electricity to their users. It's almost becoming mission impossible with some of the threats that they're facing. So you've stated that investors and insurers around the country, both in the United States and abroad, are putting pressure on electricity producers and doing it to retire coal and natural gas-fired plants prematurely. These institutions pressure cooperatives, investor-owned utilities, and others to replace the plants with weather-dependent wind and solar units. So to what extent have either government policies added to the pressure that you're facing from financial institutions?
It's created a significant fear factor, first of all. These, and it is really kind of this continual battle to try and maintain and protect our assets. The banks basically have told us over the last several years that they will stop providing us lending on coal repairs, coal assets, if we have 25% of our revenue coming from, in our portfolio, from coal. The insurance underwriters, both in the U.S. and Europe, are also telling us the same thing, that they're not going to insure our assets, not all of them, but many of them, again, if we have 25% of our revenue coming from a coal asset. So that's narrowed the number of people we can borrow money from and the number of people that will insure our assets, which makes it more expensive. Anything more expensive is bad for our consumer owners, who are largely rural, low-income customers.
Well, that was it, in terms of how this affects the families that Senator Hawley was talking about, the families, the businesses who need the electricity. Additionally, the Department of Energy is currently revising the efficiency standard for distribution transformers. The proposed standard, as I understand it, would increase the efficiency by only 1/10 of 1 percentage point. I mean, that's negligible improvement. But yet, to meet the standards, that's going to require fundamental changes in manufacturing process for these transformers. So you're going to be hit with all of this. This could jeopardize the availability of components needed to supply the electricity to homes, to businesses across the country. So worse yet, this proposal comes in the middle of an ongoing shortage of these transformers. In your testimony, you said that the proposed standard, quote, is already hindering efforts to increase the number of transformers available. So if the Biden administration proposal becomes a final rule, what impact do you expect that to have?
I mean, this is significant. It's a horrible idea. Let me just state that. And it doesn't move the needle. And there's so many other things that we've talked about today that are so much more important. And today, we can't get large transformers. It's a 3 to 4 year time frame to get a transformer. And everything we've talked about today in terms of infrastructure, transmission, operations, generation, all this stuff requires electricity wire, conduit, poles, transformers. So all this is going to do is slow down that whole process. And then the real question is, we got stuff to fix now. I mean, we have a business to run, and we have to repair and keep basically this equipment up to date. So we have hundreds of millions of dollars that need to be spent just to keep our existing system up to speed. And then when we start talking about adding all these new projects, renewables, that's even more infrastructure needs.
And when you run through this whole list of the things that you would need to relate to, any of it come from China?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. No further questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Don't need no further questions. Senator Hickenlooper.
Great, and again, thank you all for this. Mr. Robb, in the debt ceiling negotiations that the chair referred to, there was a strong interest in interregional transmission, its role of promoting reliability and resilience. Can you speak to the role that interregional transmission plays in promoting reliability within the grid?
It seems to be a very popular question I'm receiving these days.
Exactly.
Now, interregional transmission is a terrific way to build resilience and reliability into the grid. It diversifies your resource base. I think David talked about the benefits that Associated has by having straws into a number of different markets and resource bases. So I think there's a tremendous amount of value to getting our head around the state of the transmission system, our ability to build resilience into the grid through expanded transmission, whether it's interregional transmission for reliability purposes or longer scale projects to unlock renewables and get them to load. I think it's a very right-minded thing for us to be very aggressive at looking at. With all the provisos that David said, the supply chain to get these projects built needs to be solved in parallel.
Got it. And also, as you're aware, FERC's got an open docket on minimum transfer capabilities, including workshop public comments. Is NERC, are you following or a part of that docket? And given both Congresses and FERC's demonstrated interest in minimum transfer capabilities, would you be able to prioritize getting the study completed more rapidly than the allotted time, let's say maybe in 6 months or 8 months?
So to be fair, we were surprised by the provision in the bill.
You and me both.
We were enthused about it, but surprised about it. I think it's a right-minded thing for us to do, but I can't commit right now that I have my head fully around what it's going to take to do that project correctly. But I think it needs to be done.
I think there's as we've heard today, at every corner, there should be a sense of urgency.
Yep.
I yield back to the chair.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Tudor, if I could just come back to you and pick up Senator Barrasso's line of questioning. He was talking to you about components in China. You said yes. Elaborate. What comes from China?
Well, when you start talking about batteries, many of the minerals come from China. You talk about solar panels. As you know, there's been an embargo against solar panels coming from China. The number of the solar panel companies they're built in China. So when you start bringing renewables into the mix and all these projects, part of what what Manu's talking about is that all these projects are sitting there in the queue, but not all of them have panels. What they've done is they may have land, they may have bought a transformer. They have to do certain things to they may have put a deposit down, but just because they put a deposit down on 10 different sites in PJM doesn't mean they're ever going to build that solar. And part of the challenge is, where are you going to get the equipment? And a lot of that equipment, it comes from overseas, and most of it from China.
Is it a good idea in general for us to be more dependent for critical energy components on China, in your view?
I do not think it's a good idea. No,
yeah, I wouldn't think so either. Let me ask you just briefly about another Biden administration rule. This is an EPA rule that would limit carbon dioxide emissions from coal and gas power plants that they issued just last month. You mentioned this in your testimony. You said, I'm going to quote you, the EPA has indicated that their goal is to encourage the closure of coal and natural gas units. Let me just ask you, what do you expect the effect of those mandates will be for prices in Missouri? for example?
Well, there will be significant litigation against the 111BD rules. They're not, right now it's just a proposal. There's a 60-day time frame for all of us to make comments. I think that, first of all, is unfair for the RTOs and companies like ours or Southern Company. For us to actually try and look at the effects of that in a 60-day window is frankly unfair. And then whatever they come out with the rule, that's when we have to file litigation. I think you will see significant litigation against that rule. That's money and time, and that cost. So if you have a strategy to run someone out of business by basically taking away their financing and their ability to insure, and you increase their cost, that's a quick way. And then you incent other resources. I'm not pointing at anybody. If you incent other resources, what you do is you create this scenario where it's picking sides. It's picking winners and losers. And I don't think we should be picking winners and losers. That's just my personal opinion.
Well, you're the expert in this field, not me. I would just say that it seems to me that we wouldn't want to be closing down our own energy resources in this country, raising prices for our consumers while simultaneously making ourselves dependent on China in particular, where America gets poorer, China gets richer. That seems like a bad deal to me, whether we're talking about energy or anything else. So I kind of think we're going in the wrong direction here, and I think that your testimony points that out and highlights it. So thank you for being, go ahead.
One last point is that I don't know how you can do this, but any way that you can actually slow the EPA down, and they're supposed to have this joint discussions going on with the DOE, anything we can do to get them understanding the significant risk they're putting our country at by forcing something that works to go away before you have something to replace it, we've got to slow them down. That doesn't mean that I'm against, I believe in climate change. I think the climate is changing. I just think reliability is more important. Sorry.
Hey, I'm with you. And also, let's talk about the people who you serve, who pay the bills. Are we going to ask low-income folks, working people in my state, to foot the bills for this administration's climate agenda that benefits China? No thanks. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Let me again thank all of you. It's tremendous. I think it's very interesting. You can tell by the questions and the intention that you were able to capture and hold. One thing I will say is that transmission is going to be a challenging thing for us. We have some states that don't want to be involved because they've got a pretty good monopoly. And we understand that. And we want to make sure that they're protected, but also be part of this as we have to be able to, move these electrons. So we're going to ask for your input and thoughts. If you would, anything you want to submit to the committee along how you think we can navigate the transmission by not encroaching and basically changing someone's whole business model. That's not our intention. And I want to make sure that these states that have these tremendous delivery systems, I think you all know which ones I'm talking about, but these are all our friends. We want to make sure they have the opportunity to do what needs to be done for us to move the electrons that need to be moved. We're going to need your input to make that happen, because right now it'll be challenging, but without transmission, we're not going to be able to move, whether it's fossil or whether it's renewables. We can't move it. We know that, and we're not going to meet any deadlines whatsoever. And I think if you, the most interesting meeting I had in my office about a month ago, I came in and there were a group of military people from Germany. And I'm thinking, what in the world am I didn't know I'm on armed services and all that. So I thought that's what they says, we came to explain to you, if you want to know what not to do with your energy grid, look at what we did. We did the wrong thing. We took things offline before we had anything to replace it and became totally dependent on Russian energy, oil and gas, cheap. It's like a dope dealer. They get addicted to it. And basically, they're paying a heck of a price right now, and we're doing everything we can to give them the support, but we have to be energy secured. That's the most important thing. And I think that with the debt ceiling today, I'm very appreciative. Democracy is working well. You had Democrats and Republicans both joining forces, which we'll do hopefully today, sometime today, tonight, whenever. But it's, I still think I believe in this great country and the process we have, even though it gets quite challenging at times. So don't give up, okay? But we need your input. So with that, Members will have until the close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record. With that, the meeting's adjourned.